All right. Here's another thing I kind of wanted to talk about with DC Rebirth, and I have a love-hate thing with this. And when I say love, I mean like idea. But there's something on here that kind of irks me at the same time. It's not with the Joker thing where I thought about it and I was like, yeah, this actually is a cool idea. With this, it's like it's a cool idea, but at the same time, you can easily mess this up. You know what I mean? So, as before with the Joker video, if you have not read DC Rebirth, and you do not want to be spoiled, just put watch later or go back. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to back out now. Okay, so if you're still here, I guess you either want to be spoiled on this big thing of DC Rebirth, or you've already read the comic. So it is revealed that Wally West has discovered who was really behind the New 52 universe, like what created the New 52 universe. It wasn't Pandora, and it wasn't anything else. As it turns out, it was someone else who manipulated the Flashpoint the Flashpoint event and created something else out of it, and literally wiped out 10 years. And that person is the one you're looking at. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen was the one behind the New 52. He is the true mastermind. He was the one who destroyed the DC universe. And whether it be intentional or unintentional, that's the interesting thing. Because here's the thing. I'm going to talk about this real quick. I find it interesting that a very cynical being, out of all the characters, Dr. Manhattan was the one who quintessentially, changed the universe because he felt that the DC universe was way too optimistic. He felt like, this isn't right, so I'm going to change it to make it feel like, how my universe was. And that's why it kind of changed the way it is. And there's some really, real quick on the comic itself, there's some really meta things that, between Wally and Dr. Manhattan of optimism versus cynicism in comics, and it's very good. It's very well put together, and I feel like that's an interesting idea. Now let's talk about the possibility now that a Watchmen character is now part of the DC universe. As we all know, Watchmen is a very well-loved comic. It's one of the greatest pieces of comic book literature up there. It's probably like at the top of the pyramid to some people. To some people, Watchmen is that, the pinnacle of comics, more or less. Now, I myself, I've read the comic. It's nothing grand. To me, I like it, but at the same time, it's kind of like how I feel about Preacher, where I understand and acknowledge it's a very important piece of literature in comic books, but it's just not for me. It just wasn't for me. That's how I kind of feel with this, is that, this it wasn't my thing, but I do acknowledge and I do understand why it was, why people hold it up in such high regard. I like it, but I'm not absolutely in love with it. And that's why I was kind of like cool with the before Watchmen stories. Now let me explain why I'm cool with this. Because one, the biggest reason being, Alan Moore may have created Watchmen, but guess who owns Vertigo and these characters on a whole? Sadly, it ain't Moore. DC owns these characters, so it's their characters, so they can see how they can do what they want with it. Alan Moore can say stuff. Oh boy, is he going to say stuff! Trust me, it's Alan Moore. But still, they're not in the end of the day. They're not his characters. DC can do whatever the fuck they want with them. So, that's kind of the bottom line right there. But let me explain. Let me say this. It's the same reason of why I kind of dig Before Watchmen, because it doesn't touch the original story. Before Watchmen just expands on that universe without even, wanting to touch the big universe on a whole. And I feel like this does the same. Jeff Johns did the same thing with putting Dr. Manhattan in the DC universe in the first place, because if you guys remember in the original comic, Dr. Manhattan left his universe. He just went, I'm gone, because of how he felt about humanity and what happened after that. And we didn't know where he went. All he said was, I'm leaving this universe. There's nothing here for me. So, yeah, he did. So, technically, Johns didn't touch anything. If anything, he's expanding further on what happened to Dr. Manhattan after he left the Watchmen universe. So that's kind of the thing, is that he's not really touching what happened there. We just, we don't know where Dr. Manhattan went. He could have gone to, Peru on Earth 35 or something for all we know. Well, now we know. But I think it's interesting that Dr. Manhattan is the one that was the one behind the New 52. He was the one who erased 10 years, destroyed certain relationships and legacies of characters. And the reason why is because he felt like this universe was too optimistic. He felt like, and that makes sense because, if you've read Watchmen, then it's not exactly the most optimistic universe in the, in DC comic, in DC or Vertigo comics, period. It's a pretty depressing world where Dr. Manhattan's from. So I feel like he would bring that kind of jaded outlook to what most people consider the DC Comics being the most optimistic universe. I mean, hell, Dark Knight Returns has some optimism to it. So I feel like that's an interesting idea that, one of the most cynical characters, the only thing more cynical would be the comedian, but he's fucking dead, and Rorschach. But yeah, one of these cynical characters being brought into this universe to change it because he came from a world where heroes were spat on. Dr. Manhattan was not in a great place. He was the only godlike being in his universe, and the girl he loved cheated on him. Humanity kind of, he felt like he was beyond humanity, and he felt kind of justified about it. He was a part of an act that led to a lot of people's death, both in the movie and the original comic book. It's, in the comic book it's a fake alien invasion that he could have stopped, but he didn't, and he kind of felt shitty about it. He also killed one of his comrades, got that too. So, there's a lot that could make this man so cynical and make him go, no, I hate the universe now. So it's interesting to see where that's going to go, for Dr. Manhattan. And the way Jeff Johns kind of talked about it, it almost feels like Dr. Manhattan's going to be like this big villain for the DC universe in a way. Now let me talk about something I'm not cool with. I'm not going to be cool with if they do this. I'm cool with Dr. Manhattan in this universe. His story was kind of wrapped up in Watchmen, and it's kind of open-ended enough. And I feel like it's open-ended enough where you could see him doing something like this. Now, there's a moment in this comic book where Batman pulls out the smiley face with a piece of blood on it, and yeah, that's comedian's thing. But on the other hand, some people have kind of theorized, what if Dr. Manhattan didn't kill Rorschach, but instead sent him to the DC universe? I have a problem with that because, whereas what I said with Dr. Manhattan, where, he left his universe and it's kind of open-ended of where he could have gone, and it, okay, that makes sense. He left his universe behind and now he found a new one. That makes sense. I mean, I can roll with that. But if if it's something like, oh, Rorschach, he didn't die, he just got sent to the DC universe, that's where I kind of draw the line, because that storyline with Rorschach and his whole investigation and, no compromise even in the face of Armageddon, that I feel like that whole thing, that's where, cheating Rorschach's death and saying, oh, he didn't go to the DC, he ended up in the DC universe. Again, I'm not saying he's in the DC universe, but if somewhere down the line we find Rorschach is in fact in the DC universe this whole time, then I'm going to have a problem. But please, I really think they won't do something that stupid. I just kind of had that thought in my head that made me go, oh, what if they do that? That would be total bullshit. So that's my thing, is that if they say, like, they change the death, that's where I kind of say, okay, now you've touched something that shouldn't have been touched. It's not like with before Watchmen or Dr. Manhattan even entering the DC universe, where it's open-ended enough where you can do what you want with it without touching the original story. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of the Watchmen comic, but I do acknowledge, yeah, that story's that story is, a very important piece of literature for, comic history. Like I said, it's probably, to most people, it's the top of the fucking pyramid. So and again, Rorschach's story is kind of like, that whole thing kind of led up to his death. So if you try to do something like that, which I'm afraid, just from that last image, I'm afraid they might, then I'd have a problem. But with Dr. Manhattan in the DC universe, I was a little like, really? We're bringing Watchmen into the DC universe? Okay. But now I kind of think like, Actually, that's not a bad idea. That could be interesting. That could lead to some interesting. That could lead to some interesting stories. But we'll just have to see where this goes in terms of Dr. Manhattan now in the DC universe, and possibly being a villain for the DC universe. That ought to be interesting. And seeing himself not really as a villain, because again, he's a very cynical character, especially if you've seen where he comes from in his universe. So yeah. So I'm really curious, guys. What do you guys think of Dr. Manhattan now part of the DC universe? Do you guys like it? Do you guys hate it? And again, this is just my personal opinion. If you think this is not a good idea, I can understand why. I can absolutely understand why you don't think having Dr. Manhattan in this universe doesn't work. I can completely understand that. Totally 100% understand why you're not cool with this. I'm just kind of like, it's cool. Let's just see where it goes, and hopefully it won't suck. That's where I'm kind of at right now. It's an interesting idea. Hopefully it won't suck. Anyway, so really interested to see what you guys have to say about this one. But anyway, once again, hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you guys later.